Hey, this is Jeff Lemire, the comic book creator behind titles like Sweet Tooth, Essex County, Black Hammer, Minor Arcana, and you are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 197 of the Oblivion Bar podcast. I am your solo host this week, Chris Hacker. Aaron Knowles is not with us this week. He is currently abroad doing other things and other stuff. So if you could just go over to @BetterActionsTTV and just give him the middle finger emoji, as many as you can fit into the message box for me. That would really be helpful because this week, big episode. You know, we say this quite a bit, maybe too much possibly, but I'm being totally honest here with everybody listening right now that this week on the show and having someone like Jeff Lemire on the podcast is an extremely big deal for me. Not only just, you know, again, for the Oblivion Bar, but as a comic book reader, when I think back to like when I really started getting into comics the way that I am now, you know, I've been pretty vocal about how that Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo Court of Owls run was very prevalent towards my extreme love of comics and becoming a Wednesday warrior and setting up a pull list and talking about comics online with people on Twitter back when that was a cool platform to be on. Jeff Lemire and his work, and I'm thinking very specifically of like Sweet Tooth and his Moon Knight run. I mean, even the Terrifics, when the New 52 first kicked off, or not New 52, excuse me, when Rebirth first kicked off and they had a lot of those the new age of heroes. I forget what the name was called. You know, the Terrifics was sort of the big one. That was Jeff Lemire on that book with sort of creating a DC version of Fantastic Four. I was so into it. And I think that just sort of speaks to a broader, sort of more appealing, you know, sentiment that Jeff Lemire has always just he's always just really struck me with his work. Everything that he's done, I found enjoyable on some level, whether he is the sole creator doing both writing and drawing, but also just as a writer. You know, I feel like Sweet Tooth is an easy one, but I would say like The Dissenter is also equally as incredible. And there's also like Primordial and of course Essex County, which we get into quite a bit here in this conversation. Gideon Falls, Phantom Road, which something crazily, everybody, if you're listening to this and you know, if you've been listening to the Oblivion Bar for a long time, you know that back in 2023, I want to say, through our partnership with Whatnot, we actually got a variant cover. Like we were able to pick an artist and create a variant, like an actual variant that was sold in stores. And we picked Phantom Road #1, of course, being a Jeff Lemire joint. And we got Christian Ward, good friend of the show, to do that cover. And that's very purposeful, like, again, because of my affection for Jeff Lemire's work. But to continue on, Black Hammer, Royal City, which he actually sort of talks about a little bit here. There's also Minor Arcana, and that's not even getting into a lot of his big two work. You know, speaking of Absolute Flash and JSA and his Robin and Batman story, the most recent one being, there was a previous first run, and now there's currently a Jason Todd sort of spinoff to that as well. So we get into a lot of that, but I think sort of the central pillar of this conversation, and I'll try not to be super long-winded here in the intro, but 10,000 Inkstains, his memoir that he's been working on for quite a while now, which is sort of a mixture of some of his essays from his Substack, Tales from a Farm, but also showing off some references and actual pages and even whole comics that have never been released before are in this 10,000 Inkstains. And I had the pleasure of reading that early. I should also say big shout out to Dark Horse for not only sending that over, but also just getting us in contact with Jeff. Because again, if you haven't heard, or if you can't tell from my buttering up early on in this conversation, Jeff's one of my all-time favorites. There's really no easy way to say it. And I feel like I try to sort of treat every conversation the same and not put any extra pressure on myself or the creator. And I don't think that happens here, of course. I mean, everyone, you can let me know after listening to this if you think that I do that. But it's hard not to get sort of overly excited when you get a chance to talk to someone like Jeff Lemire. So very excited to share this conversation with everybody. You know, if you've been following Jeff's career long enough, you know that he is sort of a reserved guy, sort of quiet even. And I say it in this conversation and I stand by it. It's an extremely endearing trait to have, to sort of expose your underbelly in this medium in comics. That's what it is. And if you've, again, read a lot of Jeff's work, you know that he's not really shy about sharing things that he's worried about or sort of digging up past traumas or anything like that. But when you're talking to him face to face, and I even felt this while talking to him here, he is a sort of a more quiet soul, right? Like he lets his work do his talking. And I really appreciate that. And again, I find it really endearing. So I'll shut up about that now. I'll stop the preamble. I'm sure everyone that's clicked on this episode already wants to hear Jeff talk about 10,000 Ink Stains and some of the other stuff in his career. So very briefly, before we get into that, if you want to support the Oblivion Bar podcast, consider going over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Oblivion Bar Pod. It's the best way to support the show. For your support over there on Patreon, you get access to the grid, which is Aaron and I's sort of sandbox. We like to call it the Oblivion Bar After Dark, where we sort of talk about everything that we wouldn't generally talk about here on the normal show. So you get a little bit of that. You also get early access to these episodes. So everyone listening to this right now, you could be listening to it early over on Patreon. And you also get Patreon polls. We'll also share our episode transcripts. So I like to overly prepare for these conversations with creators. You get access to all those questions and references that I'm reading off currently. Actually, as I'm talking to you right now, this is something that sort of keeps me on track and definitely keeps Aaron on track because, he likes to go on his segues. So the episode transcript is pretty much like our living Bible that we use for every single episode. So once again, patreon.com/Oblivion Bar Pod. Go check that out. You can also give it a shot. 7-day free trial. So if you want to just a little teaser to see if you like supporting the Oblivion Bar, we would greatly appreciate it. And hopefully you find something you enjoy. I know people really like the grid because, again, it's just more of Aaron and I and our shenanigans. So go check that out. Enough preamble. Very excited to bring this conversation to you guys here. Again, go pick up 10,000 Ink Stains. If you're listening to this before July 15th, which is when the book is released, make sure you guys call your LCS, get that thing pre-ordered. This is the kind of book that you want to support. We need more of this. We need more Jeff Lemires in the world. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get in this conversation with Jeff Lemire. This July, one of the greatest creator-owned comic series of all time begins a powerful new chapter.
From Oni Press, return to the Eisner Award-nominated world of The Sixth Gun, as creators Colin Bunn and Brian Hurt reunite for the battle for the sixth #1, an extra-sized comic event told across 3 prestige format issues.
In 1866, in the aftermath of the Civil War, a race to claim 6 objects of enormous occult power began, thrusting the fate of humanity into the hands of an ordinary young woman and a hard-nosed gunfighter. Together, they were the best hope to stop Armageddon. They prevailed, but at a terrible price.
3 decades later, at the dawn of the 20th century, the Sixth Gun is about to be reborn anew, as it has been countless times across the centuries. This time, however, a brigade of familiar fighters is ready and waiting to challenge a secret cabal, one that hopes to use the gun's limitless power to incept a new century of war and suffering.
The Sixth Gun, Battle for the Sixth #1, coming to comic shops everywhere on July 23rd, only from Oni Press.
And now, this week's special guest.
Joining us today is the Eisner Award-winning New York Times bestseller behind titles like Sweet Tooth, Primordial, Exodus County, Phantom Road, Black Hammer, Descender, Royal City, Gideon Falls, The Bone Orchard Mythos, Fish Flies, and Minor Arcana. That's just a couple of them. He has also recently returned to DC Comics with writing duties on JSA with artist Diego Ortega, Absolute Flash with artist Nick Robles, and Robin and Batman Jason Todd with artist Dustin Yuen. He is here today to discuss his upcoming memoir over at Dark Horse Comics, 10,000 Ink Stains, which hits shelves on July 15th. It is my honor to welcome Jeff Lemire onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Jeff, what an honor it is to get you here today on the Oblivion Bar podcast. And I have just an immediate deviation as soon as we hop here on camera. As I was reading 10,000 Ink Stains, I learned that you went to film school back in the day, which puts you in this very special category of some of my favorite guests to get here on the Oblivion Bar, which are comic creators who are also big film nerds. So with how busy you are, and how busy you have been here recently, are you ever able to get to the movie theaters anymore? And if so, is there a recent movie that you've seen that you sort of sticks out, or one that really stuck with you afterwards?
Oh man, I wish I don't get to the movie theater as much as I used to between work and family. There's always things I want to see, but I never get there, and I end up watching them at home. But I don't know. I haven't seen anything good lately. I got to be honest. I'm looking forward to 28 years later. I want to see that.
Sure.
And, I don't know. That one's buzzing. I want to see that for sure.
Yeah. I actually saw that last week, and it's been sort of divisive, I think, among movie fans, people who enjoy cinema, and I'm using like cinema in quotations, like people who enjoy the art form, I guess, really seem to like it. And it's weird because everyone that I listen to and respect, reviewers, people who, again, write about film, really love it. And I just couldn't connect with it. So I'm curious if and when you eventually get to it, whether it be, again, at the theater or at home, I'd love to, I'll ask you about it next time we're at a con together. I'll have to see if you eventually saw it 28 years later and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I do love Alex Garland and Danny Boyle. So yeah, I'm kind of the target audience, but we'll see. We'll see.
Sure. They definitely do a lot of innovative things. I will say that. Like it's all Boyle and Garland on screen. Like they're trying a lot of things. They're swinging really hard for the fences. I'll tell you that. And I think anyone can appreciate that. And, speaking of 10,000 Inkstands, which is again, sort of the central pillar of this conversation, you mentioned in that there towards the beginning, when we're in the early part of your life before you actually even get into comics, you mentioned that you worked in a kitchen. And as a fellow former service industry worker, I bartended for around 10 years. I still have a hard time properly explaining how much those late night cleaning / venting / drinking sessions really meant to me and still mean to me to this day. It's one of those, like, you had to be there kind of situation. So I'm curious, was that sort of your same relationship with the industry? And
very much.
And then leading up to Essex County, this was your life. Again, explain that to me, like sort of noodle on that idea on the restaurant industry before getting into comics.
Yeah, I mean, I was in film school, here in Toronto, and near the end of film school, I needed to get a job to help pay for things. And like with so many people, the service industry, restaurant industry is sort of an easy thing to get your foot in the door. I started washing dishes and then moved to the kitchen. And then when I got out of school and I really wanted to focus on comics full time, it was really good because, the shifts are flexible. And so I could pretty much work night shifts in the kitchen, and then I could draw all day because I do like to draw. Like, I'm much more of a morning person when it comes to the creative stuff. So that really worked for me for a long time. And I did that for, I guess I did it for a decade too. I was doing that at least a decade. And yeah, even when I started getting a little more serious about comics and having things published, and Top Shelf published the Essex County books in 2005, 2006, I was still, having to work in the kitchen because those books, well, they started to get some critical acclaim and sort of gave me a foothold into the comics industry. They still weren't really, paying the rent, it was a really small publisher. And so, yeah, I was still working in kitchens right up until almost Sweet Tooth in 2008, I guess. And I kind of just thought that would be my life. I didn't think I'd make a living doing comics. It seemed really unrealistic. And so I just kind of thought, yeah, I would work in restaurants or work as a cook and then do comics as sort of my passion thing, and I was and would have been probably happy doing that. I'm glad that I can make a living doing comics and can focus more of my time on it, obviously now, but it was a good life. There's a lot of camaraderie and stuff in the kitchen and a lot of great characters that you can, you can pull from. And that I did, it was a real sort of community that we had working in the kitchens, especially here in Toronto. I was working with a lot of musicians. It was either artists or musicians who worked in kitchens, and I worked with a whole bunch of musicians who were kind of in the indie rock scene at the time, and it was a good time. I really enjoyed it, and it fed into my work quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. You're so right. Camaraderie is the sort of highlighted word in that, all of that. There is a certain level of, again, as I said, sort of in the question, that you had to be there to sort of understand what it's like to be in that industry. And I feel like I'm currently wearing a St. Louis Blues hat, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point with the hockey theme of it all. But when I lived in St. Louis and going to college myself, I bartended my way through college, and I miss it. I was just talking to my partner the other day about, she asked me, she's like, would you ever want to go back and bartend again? Or do you miss it even? And I was like, I miss it every day. But, and this sort of leads into a question. This isn't me just noodling on my own ideas, but I found it hard, right, to separate from the industry eventually. And I'm curious, when you were eventually finding success with Essex County and with Sweet Tooth, and even Lost Dogs as well, was there a hard disconnect for you too? Were you able to sort of just hack it off and be done? Or did you find yourself wanting to go back?
For me, it was a gradual thing. I think I was ready. I was at a different point in my life where I was pushing 30 and I got married. And so I kind of, it was like a transitional period. And I didn't just quit all at once. I went from working full time in kitchens to I was able to work maybe 3 shifts a week. And then I went down to, I was just working 1 shift a week, and then finally, so there was a, I didn't go
weaning off.
Yeah. Weaning off of that lifestyle. And the more that the comics started to take off and the more money I was making with comics, the less shifts I was able to take. So it kind of it sort of one slowly fed into the other.
Sure. Did you ever have any ambition to move to the front of the house? Did you always just want to be a cook, or did you ever want to bartend or serve?
Yeah, I like the kitchen. Yeah. Well, actually, the restaurant I worked at was an open kitchen, though. That was actually in the front of the house. It was a really, we were in front of we were like the first thing you saw when you came in. So yeah, I kind of always, it's like you're on a stage making freaking burritos or whatever.
Wow. That's an interesting concept. I don't think we have much of that here in the States.
Yeah, it was a cool, weird little place I worked at for like 8 or 9 years here in Toronto. It was like all these ex-punk rock guys started it as just like a taco takeout thing, and it kind of grew into a kitchen. And I think that's why there were always so many musicians working there too. It kind of had this sort of legacy of musicians in the area kind of giving each other work and stuff. And it was a cool place.
And you go over that quite a bit towards the beginning of this memoir that we're going to be talking about today. And I say we just get into it here with 10,000 ink stains. And you mentioned in the intro that you're, a pretty private person. I think anyone who's been following your career or has, met you in person at a con, you can sort of feel that with you. You are the Jeff Lemire that you hear right now, everybody. That's the one you meet at cons. And that's not a knock at all. I think it's really endearing, actually. And that actually makes this memoir, 10,000 ink stains, as a longtime fan of yours, all the more important. And everyone that I've talked to about this upcoming, memoir that I've had the honor of reading early, they're very excited about it because this is a part of you that a lot of people haven't been able to really see in depth. And, you've said, and I'm sort of elaborating here on this, is that it's a way of reevaluating, this storied 25-year career you've had in comics, but also an exercise in processing your life up to this point. You mentioned that you're brinking on 50, and this is a time to sort of look back on all of that. And you do an excellent job of laying out what your life has been before and even during the creation of some of your most accomplished works, Essex County, Sweet Tooth, Black Hammer, along a lot of the things that we've already talked about thus far. So, did your relationship change with any particular segment or even a specific moment of your life while working on this project and sort of reflecting on it?
Yeah, I think it did. It was an interesting process. It kind of coincided with a lot of other sort of big moments in my life, so it all got mixed together too. I guess it was like coming out of COVID, which kind of shifted everyone's perspective on their lives, I think, to some degree.
Sure.
So there was that. And then I went from COVID, I went right into show running the Essex County TV show here in Canada. So comics really, to say comics for my life was sort of, I really, from 2002, 2003 onward, I draw every day, for 8 hours or whatever. It's like such a routine, and I love that routine. It's very healthy for me. But when I did the TV show, I was suddenly away from comics for a year and on set and working in a very social kind of collaborative process of filmmaking. And it was so different from what I had been used to for the last 20 years. That was a big shift, where I had this extended break and I think I got some perspective, because when you stop and you come to appreciate comics even more, when you kind of lose it for a little bit. And I found that whole process of show writing was very stressful. It's an extremely stressful gig to do. And you put that on top of sort of being out of my routine of making comics and stuff. So I think I had all that stuff was going on as I worked on this book, and it just sort of, I think it was really good to I don't often look back on work. I'm always working on the next thing. And, I'm like right on to the next page or next project. And I just kind of put stuff in a drawer and don't even look at it. I've never reread any of my work or anything like that. So going back and kind of going through each sort of, stage of my development and career was really interesting. And I don't know if your question was, I guess, I think I have a real appreciation for the early days how free it was, especially before I started making a living doing it. When you're just sort of, when I was working in restaurants and drawing Essex County and stuff, it was just complete freedom because you didn't really have anything to lose, and I didn't really expect to make those books to really even be published or anything. I was just creating and living my life. And that's sort of like you only get to do your first books once, right? And so looking back on that was a really kind of cool, and I have a new appreciation for it, and yeah, I mean, and then you kind of looking at all the different stages and kind of thinking about where you were, it gives you, even for me, it kind of gives us some context, of like, even the mistakes I made or the things I did that I wasn't as happy with the end results. You can kind of look at what was going on and see why almost, and then it kind of makes you more aware of decisions you make now because you kind of thought of all these things and that you've been through and decisions you've made and work you've done, and it can all kind of helps to inform what you want to do next for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like the mistakes you make throughout your life, they stink in the moment, but a lot of times they just better prepare you for how to react to those kind of situations later on.
Yeah, and just what to say no to,
or that, right? Yeah, and you even talk about it a little bit in 10,000 Inkstains about how was it Essex County, perhaps? I'm forgetting the actual title that you're talking about, but you mentioned how like the process of obviously getting paid money is great for working on comics, but there was that deadline. The deadline was like this sort of a very abrasive reaction that you weren't prepared for, I don't think, in that time of your life.
I think you're talking about when I did the Nobody, because that was like my first sort of real paying job for DC before Sweet Tooth, and which was great. I got to finally quit the restaurant completely and just work on comics all day, which was awesome. But it was the first time, it wasn't even so much a deadline as a page count, because when I did Essex County and other projects before that, I was just doing it for myself. So I just kind of, if a scene wanted to be 10 pages, I just drew 10 pages. You didn't have to really think about how many, any sort of a restriction. The Nobody was the first, it was definitely 144 pages that I had to tell the story, right? So you had to really start to condense my storytelling a little bit. And I had to learn how to do that in ways that didn't change my storytelling. So yeah, It was a bit of a learning curve on that project. But by the time I'd finished that, then I went on to Sweet Tooth pretty much right away. And then you're doing, 20-page issues, and the page count and sort of that structure actually became quite fun to work with. But at the beginning, it did feel a little bit restrictive for sure. Yeah.
Now we've had the great fortune of talking to a couple different creators who have dabbled in Hollywood. We had Matt Fraction on recently when he was working on Godzilla, and then obviously you with Sweet Tooth, and then I just had another one in my head. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff Johns was someone else that we've spoken to semi recently who had a moment while working on a television series or a film. And it's funny, you saying that you sort of grew a greater appreciation for the comic medium. They've all said that. They all, like, we stepped away for a bit, we did the TV thing, and now we're so excited to be back in comics. And I'm just curious, like, is there any different muscle that you earn from working in TV and film that you don't get in comics that you sort of miss now that you're back fully in comics? Or are you just happy to be back working in comics and doing, again, as we spoke about earlier, your 6 to 8 titles that you're working on at once?
I mean, there are things about working in film and TV that I really enjoyed. I like the social aspect. Doing comics is so solitary, which obviously you have to mostly enjoy that or else you wouldn't do it. And sure. I do enjoy mostly working alone every day, but it was kind of cool just to be with people all day. I hadn't really, since working in restaurants, I hadn't really had that sort of a social kind of work environment. So that I missed that a little bit. You do collaborate in comics, but it's not the same because you're kind of both often in different countries and different parts of the world and just doing your sections of the work alone, I think I did kind of enjoy the social thing. But yeah, I mean, other than that, in terms of the creative stuff, comics for me is still such a superior medium because there's just so much more freedom to kind of have a vision and see it through. And there's an immediacy to it where you can, I'm drawing pages today that will be in readers' hands in a couple months. It's so quick and direct, and there's not a lot of art forms that really are that sort of immediate. And so it's hard to beat, really. Yeah.
Sure. Now, something I've heard from folks who have worked on memoirs before, this is a story about you. Like that's a very personal project. And I found that some people have a hard time balancing, facts and then like mixing an emotion into that project and maybe even slightly becoming a little bit of an unreliable narrator in certain aspects. Did you find that at all while you're working on this project, or did you have a pretty decent time of separating, this is what happened, here's how I felt, but this is what happened kind of deal?
Yeah, no, I didn't never really had a problem with that. I don't think, the essays that I wrote for this, I wrote them sort of just really stream of consciousness. Like I obviously edited them later, but as I was writing them, I just didn't overthink it. I kind of just, stream of consciousness, really just thinking about everything that was going on. And how it is, like you start thinking about one memory and it triggers others right away. So it's a bit of a cascade like that. You start thinking back to what was going on. You're doing whatever project and then all these other little memories start kind of attaching to it. And so I just let it kind of flow out and I didn't worry too much, and then later you obviously go through it and clean things up and take some things out that you don't want. You're
like, wait, a lot of people are going to read this. I should probably take that out of here.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself reaching out to folks from, your previous lives, like any Deadly Snake did you call it to any of those guys from back in the day?
No, I didn't really. I'm in touch. I think most of the people in the book are still in regular contact with most of them. So yeah, no, I didn't really, there was no really reaching out to anyone.
Sure. I always there are times where I'll play a game or I'll watch a movie or hear a song even, or go to a certain place. Cause I don't live in my hometown anymore and I rarely visit it. And I find myself getting a little swept up in the nostalgia of it all. And I want to reach out and be like, hey, how are you? I haven't talked to you, in 10 plus years. And I was just curious, with a project like this, just if any of that was something that sort of sparked within you at all,
Yeah, not really. I think I'm still friends with most of the people, especially in the comics industry, that I was back when I started. And I didn't really have to do that.
Speaking of sort of a bit of a collaboration effort that you had here with this book, is that the book credits Daniel Chabon and Greg Lockhart and Eric Harburn as the editors of this project, with some designer help from Courtney Minard over from, this is sort of a mixture of Dark Horse and Tiny Onion.
Yeah.
And now that this, this is not meant to siphon off any credit from them and their work on this book, but reading 10,000 Ink Stains and being a longtime fan of yours, this felt extremely personal and just, very Jeff Lemire. If you've read one of your books, a lot of them, they have a very similar tone and a tone that I absolutely love. And this might be a big question for you, Jeff, but what would you like for people to take away from reading a memoir like this and learning about your journey?
I kind of hope it sort of demystifies the creative process a little, because, when I was younger and I wanted to make comics, I also have to keep in mind that when I wanted to make comics back in the late 90s, it was a different world, where we didn't have the access to creators that people have now through social media. But nonetheless, I still think just seeing people's creative process and kind of things people struggle with while they're working on stuff that, sort of didn't demystify, like anyone can do it, it's not magic, it's just hard work, really, like anything and I think especially, I kind of opened up a little bit about sort of some of my struggles, especially when I was younger with depression and anxiety and stuff. And, I just thinking back to when I was really going through that in my early 20s and stuff, and I really wanted to make comics and I was struggling and I was not a super happy person. And, I still think there's a lot of stigma around mental health stuff. And if some creator whose work I admired had come out and talked openly about that, it would have made me feel so much more comfortable with myself and okay about it. And it would have made me feel like I can still, you can still live a life and you can still make things and do art and accomplish stuff. It's not, you don't have to give up, and so I felt like if I could put some of that out there, that it's a good thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that definitely comes across while reading this. And, I'm about, I would say 3/4 the way through. I haven't gotten to like the minor arcana part of the book yet, because you pretty much go up to like present day, which is really impressive.
I was writing it right up until 2000, like a year ago or whatever. So yeah.
And you include, which I think is really cool. There's a lot of talk at the beginning of 10,000 Ink Stains about Ashtray, which is sort of like, is it fair to say this is like your first major piece of work?
I don't know if it's major, but it was my first sort of self-published mini zine comic, that I put out into the world, even in any way. Up until then, I was drawing comics all the time, but I hadn't tried to publish anything or sort of put it out, And Ashtray was sort of the first thing. This was 2002, 2003, where I felt like I wanted to at least try to start putting stuff out there, good or bad, and sort of get some feedback and kind of, or whatever. And so, yeah, that was my very first sort of zine mini comic that I made. I think I printed up like 100 copies or 300 copies or something and just distributed them locally. This is, again, before the internet. I couldn't just post stuff. So it was like doing zine shows and putting them on commission at comic shops around town and stuff. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's it's kind of poetic that the end of 10,000 Ink Stains is the first issue of Ashtray, or at least what you had finished up to that point. And I'm curious, even in the right, you sort of prompt people before they get into it that it's slightly revised. And I was just curious, like when you say slightly revised, what were you able to add to this?
No,
this first piece of work
at all. Yeah, no, I'm not sure what it says, but yeah, it's not revised in any way. It's put out exactly as it was. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. I'm trying to look really quick to see what it says here. I've reprinted and shared a full Ashtray #1. I'm sorry. I read it incorrectly. It says what follows is a faithful, unrevised reproduction of the original mini comic. I apologize. I don't know why I thought it said revised, but that's great. Then perfect. It is directly the version.
Flaws and all. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It feels very poetic that you sort of end 10,000 Ink Stains with that. And it's still so Jeff Lemire, like when I'm going through it, like it is still very much you, even though I'm sure you probably are even slightly embarrassed looking at it in today's.
I don't know if I'm embarrassed. I mean, it's obviously really, really early work and pretty crude, but yeah, I mean, I think the reason I started putting it out even back then was I started to feel some sort of a foothold into, I don't know, getting a voice or telling stories a certain way that I felt comfortable with. So yeah, I guess putting it at the end of the book like that was sort of, it's like a full circle thing where like your earliest stuff, you're still, I'm still connected to it in some ways. And you can see the line from that to my newest work, I think you can still see the same creator there somewhere. Sure.
I agree. And speaking of your latest work, I'd love to sort of noodle on Minor Arcana for a quick moment if I can, because I absolutely love it. We're I think into, is it issue 7 just came out this past week, if I'm thinking of that correctly here. That actually was recently nominated for an Eisner for Best New Series. So congratulations on that. Thanks. That's incredible. And, you said on your Substack here recently, Tales from a Farm, that this was a dream project. And, I think that term gets thrown around sometimes by creators. And I'm just curious, what was it about working on, Taro and Teresa's story that made this, a quote unquote dream project for you?
It's not even so much the content of the book. Like, it's not even that, it's not really what the book is about that makes it a dream project. It's just the freedom that I have to kind of tell a long form story again. I haven't done that since I did Sweet Tooth, obviously. And then I tried to do it with Royal City, but I kind of crashed and burned halfway through that book, and then coming out of working on television too, and kind of just thinking to myself, well, what if I could make my own TV show, but with complete creative freedom and go wherever I want with it. And just, it kind of almost feels like that to me, where I get to do, this is my like real shot at doing a really long form story with an ensemble cast. And it's not even so much the supernatural aspects of the tarot and all that stuff, which is really fun stuff. And it certainly provides a framework for the book, but it's just the characters themselves and spending time with them month after month. Things start to evolve and take on a life of their own. They really do. I had forgotten that happens. It happened with Sweet Tooth, and it's starting to happen with this book, where when you're working on something like this for a long time and you have that time and space to sort of keep thinking about the characters or even not thinking about them, just let your subconscious work on them. New ideas come to you that you never expected, and whole new story avenues open up, and it's really kind of a magical thing when that happens, where you have some little inkling of an idea for a character at the beginning. And then by the time you get to doing that storyline, it's evolved into something so much bigger. And so I'm really enjoying that process of sort of letting the story grow and unfold at its own pace. And sort of take on a life of its own.
And even in that Substack, you mentioned that you want to have at some point, was it 4 dedicated deluxe hardcovers? So we're talking long form story here.
Yeah, that was the idea from the beginning, would be that there's 4 suites in the tarot deck. So to have eventually, if it's collected in deluxe hardcover, to have the 4 books representing the 4 suites, we thought that would be a cool way to collect it. But again, you still also have to let the story kind of unfold at its own pace. And if it works out in a way that fits perfectly, great. But if not, we'll revise the plan. But yeah, it seems like it could work.
Sure. Did I see somewhere that we're getting a change of colorist? Are you taking over as colorist at some point, or did I see that incorrectly?
I think it's the other way around. So I started off painting the book myself. And much like when I was doing that on Royal City, by about issue 5, I was burning out already. It's just so much work, and then we brought on a guest artist for a couple of issues to help me out, Letizia Gardenici, and a colorist named Patricio Del Pesce came on to color Letizia, and he tried to sort of emulate my watercolor palette and stuff so that her artwork kind of felt cohesive with mine. And when I saw how he could do that, it kind of opened the door for him to start coloring my stuff. So from issues, I think I did up to issue 6, and then Letizia does 7, 8, 9. And so from issue 10 onward, I'll be drawing it, but he'll be coloring it. And it's a huge help in not burning me out, for sure.
That was going to be my next question, was how much of a workload is that lifted off of your shoulders when it comes to...
Yeah, surprisingly. And I still get to dabble with coloring, because I still paint the covers myself. And then there's certain little sections within the book where I'll do the color, but it's just enough that it takes that extra workload off. It's probably cuts the workload almost in half. So
sure. What was, again, gosh, I don't mean to butter you up too much, Jeff, here, but your career has been, it's been a very successful one, I will say, as a longtime fan. And with this new Eisner nom, how do you react to that now in 2025 with this new book with Minor Arcana? When you hear that you're up for another Eisner, what was your first reaction? I'm just curious, how did you react to that news?
Well, I've been lucky. I've been nominated for a lot of Eisners, and I think, first of all, you put so much into yourself, like I do with Minor Arcana. It's when those personal projects, and especially the ones I'm drawing myself, when they get recognized, it's always even more special, for sure, because it's kind of a validation, and even now that people are digging what you're doing, and that's always nice. But I think more than anything, it's really gratifying that I was nominated for Essex County back in 2006 or whatever, when it first came out. So 20 years later, pretty much, I'm still being nominated for new work. That's more than anything, that I'm still doing stuff that people are responding to this far into my career is really what it's about. And that makes you feel great, and more than the individual sort of nomination itself. It just kind of, it's gratifying knowing you're still connecting with people. And yeah,
it's really refreshing to hear you say that. We recently spoke with Christopher Priest. He's been in the industry for a very long time. We sort of talked about this idea of how, being a comic creator in this medium for, however long you decide you want to tell stories, it's not guaranteed that the longer you're in the medium, you're going to continue to connect with folks.
Yeah, for sure.
And the ones that do, like yourself and like Christopher, I think, it's extremely impressive, that you guys were able to continue on. And I will say it's also really refreshing to hear you say that this stuff still means something to you, because I think it's really easy for some creators to go, it's not a big deal. The Eisners,
they're lying when they say
they're lying.
Nice. Come on, who's kidding who? In any walk of life, it's always nice to be recognized and to just for someone to say you're doing a good job. I don't care what you've accomplished. It's always nice. Everyone loves it. It's great. And it's great to be part of the industry of so many talented people. And you see your book nominated with the other best new series nominations this year are all such incredible books. Like on any year on their own could win it, and it's great to be in that company and be recognized as amongst such talented people. It's very nice.
Absolutely. And so does this mean that you're going to be at San Diego here in a couple of weeks?
I am. Yeah, I am going to San Diego.
Good deal. I always love that, because I went to, last year was my first Eisner's. So we're recording this in 2025, 2024, first Eisner's ever. And I'll be honest with you, Jeff, I honestly felt a little disheartened by just how many folks weren't there to accept their award.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. Part of me gets it. It's too, because I mean, I like being there, even when I know I'm not going to win, because I do kind of just I like them. There's something about being part of that bigger industry and that legacy of creators that I find really still exciting, and cool. Maybe I'm sappy and sentimental, but I just do. But I also know that when you're working, there is a stress that comes with it. Like, oh, what if I sit through the whole thing and I don't win? It can rip your heart out a little bit sometimes, especially when you're there. So I do know that it's almost like for some people, I think it's a defense mechanism. Like if they're not there, it's not as bad when they don't win it, But I don't know. You can't think that way. It's just, I think it's cool to be there and be a part of the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was really cool to see. I mean, again, even with a lot of people not being there to accept, I still think it was an incredible experience. And not to mention you have a hotel con afterwards. Everyone hangs out at the Hilton Hotel, that little, triad of hotels, and people drink. I don't know. Did you ever do anything like that after something like the Eisners?
I used to, not so much anymore. Yeah. When I was 15 years ago, you would have found me at all the bar cons, but the last 10 years or so, not so much.
Sure. I get that.
I'm old and I bring my family with me now. And it's just a different lifestyle.
Sure. Well, I will say, just to sort of deviate a little bit, and for those keeping track at home, this is Jeff's workload today. Okay. So we have Minor Arcana, JSA, Black Hammer, Spiral City, Phantom Road, Robin and Batman, Jason Todd, Absolute Flash. These are all monthly books in 2025 at some point, whether it is right now or at some point in 2025. I've heard rumblings of a Madame Dragonfly and some more Royal City, possibly Static Age, all upcoming. Is that accurate?
So, yeah, I mean, whenever you see what's coming out, it's not really always an accurate sort of workload. I mean, Robin and Batman 2, the Robin and Batman story, that was 3 issues, and I wrote all those like 2 years ago. So you know what I mean?
Sure.
It just takes Dustin a while to paint them. And
yeah.
What else were we talking? Some of that stuff is stuff like Black Hammer was written a year ago or a year and a half ago. And so it's not always accurate. But then of course there's other projects that haven't been announced yet. So I don't know. Yeah, it is. I'm always juggling a lot of stuff. I'm trying to cut down, but every time I say that, I end up taking something else.
You sound like me over here on the podcast, and I'm not trying to compare the two, but like Aaron and I, we have a lot of, Aaron's my co-host here on the Oblivion Bar, and we've been doing it for 5 years. We absolutely love it. Talking to creators and talking about movies and television series and anime and all the things. These interviews, they are the biggest workload that we have here on the show. And every time we have a little bit of a reprieve, or if we've done 3 or 4 of these in a row, I always tell Aaron, I'm like, man, we need to take a little bit of a break from the interviews and just, do a movie review or do a comic spotlight or something else. But I love this so much, being able to talk to someone like you or other creators. It's honestly the lifeblood of the show. And I totally get, you get excited about something, or you have a project that you really want to work on. I get not being able to say no to something like that.
Yeah, or to collaborate with someone you really want to work with. It's hard to say no. But we'll see. I am trying to cut down.
Is there anything that I'm missing from that list, by the way? Like, of all the things that I just listed off, is there anything that's been announced that like you're
I don't think
excited?
anything. There's nothing that's been announced. There's some other stuff I'm working on now that will probably be announced. I don't know, later this year or next year. But no, nothing. That's. I think you got all of it.
Can I press you a little bit on something that I've heard rumblings of?
Sure.
You don't have to divulge anything. Obviously, I don't think you would anyway, but there's been talks of a secret dream project over at DC with Raphael D. Larete. Is there anything you can say about this at all? Or
yeah, it's kind of semi-embarrassing because my dream DC project is like the DC character no one asked for. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I am working on that. It's like this weird childhood itch I needed to scratch for a certain character that, again, no one's banging down the doors asking for. Sometimes those are the good ones because you have so much freedom to kind of put yourself into them, It's been really fun writing it, actually. Yeah.
Is it? I know you like to play sort of in the darker corner of DC. Am I getting warmer or?
No, yeah, it's not. I don't think you would ever guess who it is. It's very random, and it's this 6-issue mini where we had a lot of freedom to sort of, because no one was asking for this character, to sort of really push the limits of what the character is and will be moving forward. So that's always fun. Yeah.
Will we hear anything about this at like San Diego, or is this going to be something much more?
I would think it's maybe more of a New York, like fall thing. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And actually the first time and only time we've ever met was at New York. Are you going to go to New York again later this year as well?
I don't think I'll be there, but yeah, I think they'll probably be announcing some new stuff then.
Okay. Awesome. Well, as we close this conversation, Jeff, because I feel like if I keep you here any longer, I'm going to keep trying to press you for this secret DC project, and I want to just leave it as is. So, as we close here, I want to take a little snippet from 10,000 Ink Stains to sort of put a stamp on this conversation. And you say, Jack Kirby famously said, "Comics will break your heart, kid." And maybe he was right, but I also know comics can put it back together again too. And I wouldn't dare to argue with the king, but I tend to agree with you too, Jeff, because I feel like you are a walking, talking embodiment of that sentiment that, for all the woes that we have in our life, comics for a lot of us is sort of that backbone of happiness, whether it be collecting or reading. And I just really love that sentiment. I think that's a perfect way to sort of end this conversation. I think that's a perfect way to end 10,000 Ink Stains. And I cannot implore people enough to go get 10,000 Ink Stains when it hits shelves on July 15th.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that, man.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And again, I think everyone should call their local comic book shop and pre-order that. And Jeff, I couldn't get to the majority of the project that you're working on, as we talked about, Absolute Flash, Black Hammer. We couldn't even talk about the Terrifics here today, but I would love to at some point down the road, if you have the availability, to come back here on the Oblivion Bar and talk about some of those other projects, whether it just be a centralized conversation about one of those or just sort of, noodle on a couple different ones.
Sounds good. How about when that new DC book is announced, we'll come on and talk about it.
I would love that. Maybe we can get Raphael in here as well and maybe get him to talk about it. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, before I let you go, is there anything that you want to sort of plug or highlight, Tales from the Farm or anything else that you want to sort of discuss before we let you go?
No, man, that's cool. I think, I'm excited for 10,000 Ink Stains. It's obviously in some ways the most personal thing I've ever put out into the world. So it's a big, kind of feels like a big risk for me but it's also nice to share some more of myself with my readers and connect with them. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see how people react to this. And again, the couple of folks that I have talked to about it that are big fans of yours are very excited for it as well. And I will tell you, as someone who's read most of it now, it's exactly what you want from being a longtime fan of yours. So Jeff, again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Excited to get you back on the show at some point. Excited to see you here in a couple of weeks in San Diego. That's going to be really fun. And hopefully you remember this face and we can talk about.
Just wear the Blues hat and you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing is we didn't get to talk about the Blues and you know what? I feel bad. I feel like a bad Jeff Lemire fan now. Who are you a fan of?
The Leafs.
The Leafs. Okay, that makes sense. I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to assume. So, and there's no rivalry between the Blues and the Leafs, right?
No, not really. Yeah.
Okay. I stand by this today.
Not yet. We could start one if you want.
We should start one. We should start an online beef for the Maple Leafs and the Blues. Although I will say the Blues, even though we made the playoffs, weren't great this year.
Either way, it's okay.
I will say, and I'll end on this. I'll stop. I'll leave it alone after this. To date, the greatest sporting event I've ever witnessed in my life was being in St. Louis and witnessing that 2019 team win the Stanley Cup.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah. You see these fans that have been, Blues fans since like the late 60s, finally seeing the Blues take home the cup. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hope to one day witness such a thing here, but
that was not me trying to rub it in your face, I promise. All right, Jeff. Well, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
All righty. There's that conversation with Jeff Lemire. Once again, thank you so much to Jeff for coming on the show. Really, really appreciate you coming here, taking some time to talk about your career and 10,000 Ink Stains. And I hope that this conversation, if you are a giant Jeff Lemire fan like I am, I'm sure you're already excited for this. But if you were on the fence or if you had never really heard Jeff talk about his career, or maybe you've never read any of his works, hopefully this entices you to go at least check out some of his bigger work. Like again, Sweet Tooth is a big one that people like to recommend. Gideon Falls is another big one. A lot of his Big Two stuff, again, as we talked about there just a moment ago, didn't really even talk much about his Big Two stuff, which, I mean, you could make an argument that a lot of his work is sort of within Marvel and DC. So make sure you guys go check that out. Definitely recommend his Moon Knight run. Really like that one. I think that's a really interesting take. And Sentry, another good one. Gosh, I mean, there's just so many that we could go to. But I found it really interesting. Something I wanted to sort of noodle on for a moment was that in the conversation, Jeff talks about how after he finishes any of his projects, he doesn't often go back to them. He just sort of moves on to the next thing. And he's obviously working on so many things all the time, which I didn't really get into in this conversation. I'm kind of bummed about, because I would love to learn how he was able to sort of juggle all of that. And I know it's not all timed out, and he's not like working all of it all at the same time, but it is still a lot, I think, to sort of do as much as he does. There's some creators that only work on maybe one, sometimes two projects at once, and then they move on to the next thing. Again, I found it really interesting that he said that he hasn't really gone back until putting together 10,000 Ink Stains. And I think that this is a really cool retrospective. And I kind of really wish that more creators would do something like this, like 10,000 Ink Stains, where you can reflect on your career and then sort of learn from things that you maybe did incorrectly, or maybe some things you're embarrassed about, some things that you maybe did purposely incorrectly, or maybe you were arrogant about. I don't know. There's a lot to learn from our mistakes. And I think that Jeff is very aware of that. And I love that he did this with 10,000 Ink Stains. And I do also love that he worked in a restaurant, which, again, longtime listeners of the Oblivion Bar know that I sort of, again, revere my time as a bartender and miss it all the time. But as Jeff says in this conversation, you kind of have to get away, because it will, that lifestyle will suck you up into it, and you will burn the candle at both ends pretty quickly. So again, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody listening. And also thank you again, Dark Horse, for helping us set up this conversation with Jeff and to give me early access to this memoir from Jeff. So that'll do it for episode 197. 198, everybody. We're getting into July. So San Diego Comic-Con is right around the corner, which is very exciting because both Aaron and I will be there. So if you're at San Diego Comic-Con, please come say hello. That would be awesome. But also, I don't know if you've heard of them, these two small indie films that are coming out in July. You've got Fantastic Four, First Steps, and then Superman over at DC Studios. So a lot to discuss with those two, but also, again, as I just mentioned there, San Diego, third week of July, we'll definitely be there, and it'll be insane. So I'm sure we got to do something interesting and fun for that. But also, you can make an argument as the biggest thing in July is we're recording our 200th episode, here on the Oblivion Bar podcast, which is a huge milestone and something that Aaron and I have been very loosely discussing what we want to do. But I think in reality, what it might end up becoming is us just sort of talking about the last 200 episodes and sort of in a very 10,000 Ink Stains way, a retrospective on the Oblivion Bar over the last 5 years. And it's crazy to think that we've done this silly show for 5 years, and it's given us the opportunity to go to Comic-Con every year and to talk to creators like Jeff Lemire. It's been an incredible ride. And, next week, regardless of what we're talking about, which again, will probably end up being Superman, if I'm being honest, Aaron will be here. And it's just been really exciting. We can't thank everyone that listens to the show enough for continuing to follow us here on the Oblivion Bar. So that will do it for episode 197. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can follow us over on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, that's where we are. Big shout out to our patrons, Alex, Alice, Aaron, Botter, Chris S., Chris Y., Christy, David, Elliott, Erica, George, Gianni, Greg, Haley, Ham6, Jake, Jeremy, Kyle, Losi, Mac, Miles, Mike, Olivia, Ryan L., Robert, Saunter, Sebastian, Sean, Trevor, Travis, and Zach, and Brad and Lisa over at the Comic Book Couples Counseling. Thank you all so much for joining us here on the Patreon. Again, patreon.com/Oblivion Bar Pod. If you want to support the show in a free way, go over to your preferred podcasting platform and give us a 5-star rating and or a written review. All of that helps us get into the algorithm. Only 5-star reviews, please. Unless you hate the show, just don't rate it. But if you love what we do here, 5 stars would be incredible. Again, that's really the best way to get us into the algorithm, both on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us over on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitch at Oblivion Bar Pod. Official merch for the show can be found over on our website, oblivionbarpodcast.com. Big thank you to Oni Press and Endless Comics, Games, and Cards for sponsoring the show. Very much appreciate them continuing to follow us over here on the Oblivion Bar. Big thank you to KXD Studios for all of our Oblivion Bar art. He is at KXD Graphics on Instagram. Thank you, Dream Kid, for all of our musical themes. Thank you, DJ Skyvac, for that grid theme. And once again, please keep this in mind as things start to get crazy here in the U.S. over the summer. Do not forget to tip your bartenders 20% or more. 20% is the bare minimum. If you're listening from Canada, over where Jeff is currently staying, I don't think they do tipping. I think they just pay their service industry correctly. So, I guess if you want to tip 20, that'd be cool. But I've heard in some countries, it's sort of an insult to tip 20% because they're tipped normally. They're like, what, I'm not making enough money? Like, you think I'm broke? Which would never be me. I could be making $100 an hour in a restaurant. I would still take that tip all day, every day. But point being, here in the US, tip your bartenders, your servers, your valet, your Uber driver, whomever, tip them 20%. That's it makes their day and it's easy on you. So once again, thank you all so much for listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast. Next week, Aaron will be back, but until then, we will see you next week for episode 198.